The barista always gave free coffee to the same customer. What she discovered about him changed her life forever. The clock read 7:15 a.m. when the door of Aurora Coffee opened with the familiar chime of the golden bell. Isabella Martinez didn't need to look up from the espresso machine to know who it was. For the past 2 years, since she'd started working as a barista, that same man had appeared every day at the exact same time, like a punctual ghost haunting the mornings of the small coffee shop in downtown Portland, Oregon. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with brown hair that was starting to gray at the temples and shoulders that seemed to carry an invisible but crushing weight. His clothes were always the same: faded jeans, a slightly wrinkled light blue dress shirt, and a gray wool coat that had seen better days. But it was in his eyes that Isabella saw the real story. Blue eyes that must have once sparkled with dreams and ambitions now looked like 2 foggy windows into a weary soul. "Good morning," Isabella would say every morning, forcing a warm smile. He would just nod, avoiding eye contact. The usual? Another nod. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream, no hope. Isabella would prepare the drink with the same care she dedicated to all orders, though she knew he probably wouldn't notice if she used premium beans or yesterday's reheated coffee. "$3.50, she would announce, sliding the paper cup toward him. He always paid with a $5 bill. Always left a $1.50 tip. Always left without saying a word. No thank you, no good morning, no see you tomorrow. Just silence and the door closing behind a hunched figure who dissolved into Portland's morning crowd. Isabella Martinez was 23 years old with big dreams. She dreamed of going back to college to study nursing, dreamed of helping people, dreamed of making a difference in the world. For now, she made a difference one coffee cup at a time, working double shifts to save enough money for tuition. Her grandmother, Elena Martinez, had always told her that God put people in our path for a reason. "Mija," she used to say in her musical Spanish, "kindness is like a seed. You never know where it will bloom." But that silent man intrigued her in a way she couldn't explain. There was something about how he held his coffee, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the real world. There was something about how he avoided looking at other customers, as if he feared they might see through his carefully constructed facade. It was on a rainy Thursday in November that Isabella made the decision that would change both their lives forever. Fall in Portland was particularly cruel that year. Rain fell in icy sheets that cut through the thickest coats and left everyone with a constant feeling of dampness in their bones. The mysterious man arrived that morning wetter than usual, raindrops dripping from his hair and staining the coffee shop's wooden floor. Isabella looked at him and felt something tighten in her chest. Maybe it was the way he shivered slightly as he entered, or how his hand seemed thinner than usual when he reached for his wallet. Something about him screamed loneliness in a way she could no longer ignore. "On the house today," she said suddenly, pushing the steaming coffee toward him before she could second-guess herself. The man stopped. For the first time in 2 years, he actually looked up and met her eyes. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. They were beautiful eyes, she realized, but weighted with a sadness so deep it seemed like a bottomless ocean. "Why?" he asked, and his voice was hoarse, as if it wasn't used frequently. As if he had forgotten how to talk to another human being. Isabella felt her heart beat faster. There was something about the simplicity of that question that left her speechless for a moment. Why indeed? Why was she offering free coffee to a stranger? "Because everyone deserves a little kindness," she finally replied, surprising herself with the sincerity in her own voice. "Especially on rainy days like this." He stood there for what felt like eternity, studying her face as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. Isabella could see the internal battle happening behind those blue eyes, distrust fighting against a desperate desire for human connection. Finally, he reached out and took the coffee. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then he left, as always, but something fundamental had changed. Isabella felt it in the air, like the pressure change before a storm. The next morning, he returned. But this time, when Isabella said "on the house again," he didn't just accept it. He asked, "What's your name?" "Isabella," she replied, feeling a genuine smile form on her lips. "Isabella Martinez. And yours?" "David," he said, hesitating for just a moment. "David Thompson." "It's a pleasure to officially meet you, David Thompson," Isabella said, extending her hand across the counter. David looked at the extended hand as if it were an alien object. Isabella could see the internal struggle again, but this time human connection won. He extended his own hand and shook hers briefly. His skin was rough, calloused, but the touch was gentle. "The pleasure's mine, Isabella Martinez," he said, and for the first time in 2 years, Isabella saw a glimpse of what might have been a smile. It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship that would bloom like the seed of kindness her grandmother always talked about. Day after day, the routine changed subtly. David still arrived at 7:15, still ordered black coffee, but now there were conversations. First just polite greetings, then comments about the weather, and finally, real confessions about their lives. Isabella discovered that David had been an engineer for 15 years. That he was a specialist in industrial process optimization. That he used to make a 6-figure salary and had a house in the suburbs with a yard and white picket fence. That he was married to Sarah for 12 years until she decided she couldn't deal with his negativity anymore, and filed for divorce 6 months before he lost his job. "The company decided I was redundant," he explained one particularly cold December morning, making air quotes with fingers that Isabella noticed were thinner than before. 15 years of faithful service, and I became a line item on a spreadsheet that could be eliminated to improve quarterly profits. Isabella felt her heart clench with each revelation. She herself knew financial struggle intimately. She worked double shifts at Aurora Coffee and still did freelance translation work at night to save enough money to go back to nursing school. But there was something about David's story that touched her differently. Maybe it was the quiet dignity with which he carried his pain, or the way he never asked for pity, just stated the facts with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to numb emotions to survive. "Have you tried looking for other opportunities?" she asked gently one morning, while preparing his coffee with extra care. David laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was a bitter laugh, sharp as broken glass. "At 47, he said, running his hand through hair that was graying more each day. "Isabella, in the tech world, I'm a dinosaur. They can hire 2 recent graduates for half of what they paid me, and those kids know programs that didn't exist when I graduated. Who's going to want a dinosaur when they can have velociraptors?" The weeks turned into months, and their friendship deepened. Isabella began to look forward to mornings not just for work, but for David's company. He had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh, sharp intelligence that made conversations interesting, and hidden kindness she saw in small gestures, like how he always cleaned up crumbs that other customers left, or how he held the door for elderly people entering after him. But it was on a freezing January day that Isabella realized something was very, very wrong. David arrived at his usual time, but something was different. He was wearing the same clothes for the 3rd consecutive day, Isabella had noticed, because there was a small coffee stain on his shirt sleeve that remained there day after day. There were deep dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. His skin had a sickly pallor, and when he reached for his coffee, Isabella could see he was visibly thinner. When he turned to leave, Isabella noticed he swayed slightly, as if dizzy. "David," she called softly, making him stop. "When was the last time you actually ate something real?" He turned slowly, and Isabella saw something in his eyes that scared her. It was pure desperation, barely disguised by a thin layer of wounded pride. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. "No, you're not," Isabella said firmly, looking around the coffee shop that was empty that afternoon. Her boss, Roberto, had stepped out to handle banking matters, leaving her alone with a few regular customers who wouldn't pay attention. "Sit at that table. I'm making you a sandwich." "Isabella, I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," she interrupted, already moving around the kitchen. "It's friendship. And friends take care of each other." She made the best sandwich she knew how: roasted turkey breast, creamy Swiss cheese, crisp lettuce, ripe tomato, Dijon mustard, all on fresh whole wheat bread that Roberto received from an artisan bakery every morning. She added hot tomato soup and a piece of the carrot cake that was the house specialty. When she placed the plate on the table in front of David, he looked at the food and began to cry. They weren't dramatic tears or loud sobs. They were silent tears that rolled down his face like rain on a window, carrying with them months of wounded pride, fear, and accumulated despair. "Why are you doing this for me?" he asked, his voice broken. "You barely know me. I'm just a customer. A failure who can't even keep a job." Isabella sat in the chair beside him, feeling her own tears beginning to form. "David Thompson," she said firmly, waiting for him to lift his eyes to meet hers. "You are not a failure. You're a human being going through a difficult time. And I'm doing this because my grandmother always taught me that kindness comes back to us when we least expect it. But mainly, I'm doing this because you matter. Your life matters. And sometimes life is hard enough without having to go hungry too. David ate that sandwich like a man who hadn't seen real food in days. Because, Isabella would discover later, he really hadn't eaten in 3 days. My apartment was foreclosed last week, he confessed between bites, avoiding her eyes. Unemployment money ran out 2 months ago. I sold everything that had any value. I'm sleeping in my car. Isabella felt like someone had punched her stomach. David, why didn't you tell me before? Shame, he said simply. You're a young woman full of dreams and energy. I'm a middle-aged man who lost everything. I didn't want to be another burden in your life. You could never be a burden, Isabella said, gently touching his hand. You're my friend. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She lay in bed in her small apartment that she shared with 2 roommates, staring at the ceiling and thinking about David sleeping in his car, in Portland's January cold. The temperature was forecast to reach 28 degrees. No one should spend a night like that exposed to the elements. The next morning, Isabella arrived at work with an idea that was both crazy and perfect. Roberto Diaz had owned Aurora Coffee for 15 years. A stocky man in his early 50s, with a graying mustache and a heart the size of Mount Hood. He had immigrated from Mexico when he was young, built the business from scratch, and treated his employees like family. If there was anyone in the world who could understand David's situation, it was Roberto. Roberto, Isabella said when he arrived to open the store, I need to talk to you about something. She told the whole story. About David, about 2 years of silent coffees, about the friendship that had blossomed, about the desperate situation he found himself in. Roberto listened in silence, occasionally nodding with understanding. You want me to give him work, Roberto said when she finished. It wasn't a question. I know it might sound crazy, Isabella began, but Roberto raised his hand. Mija, my own story isn't much different. When I arrived here, I didn't speak English, had no papers, slept on the floor of an apartment with 8 other men. A kind American gave me a chance when no one else would. He looked around the coffee shop he had built with his own hands. How can I not give the same chance to another man in need? When David arrived that morning, Isabella was waiting for him with her heart beating fast. David, she said before he even asked for coffee, I have a proposal for you. She explained about the conversation with Roberto, about the possibility of night shift work, helping with heavy cleaning, inventory receiving, preparation for the next day. It didn't pay much, but it would be enough for a small apartment and regular food. And there was a couch in the back where he could stay until he got properly established. David looked at her with an expression that mixed disbelief, gratitude, and fear. You invented this position, didn't you? He asked, knowing her well enough to read between the lines. Maybe, Isabella admitted with a mischievous smile. But Roberto is a good man. When I explained your situation, he said everyone deserves a second chance. David closed his eyes for a moment, and Isabella could see the epic battle happening behind his closed eyelids. Pride versus necessity. Independence versus accepting help. Despair versus hope. When he opened his eyes again, there was something different in them. A flicker of something Isabella hadn't seen in months. 1 week trial, Roberto said when David showed up that afternoon. If you're reliable and work hard, the job is yours permanently. David worked as if his life depended on it. Because, in many ways, it did. He arrived at 6 p.m. and worked until 2 a.m., cleaning every corner of the coffee shop until it sparkled, organizing inventory with an engineer's precision, preparing everything for the next day with meticulous care. He slept on the back couch, woke early, showered in the small employee bathroom, and was always impeccable when Isabella arrived to open the store. Slowly, David began to transform. Work gave purpose to his days again. Having a safe place to sleep and regular food returned color to his skin and life to his eyes. And most importantly, having people who trusted him and depended on him began to heal the deep wounds in his self-esteem. But the real transformation began 3 months later, when David made an observation that would change Aurora Coffee's destiny. David was organizing inventory one night when he noticed patterns that Roberto and Isabella hadn't seen. As an engineer, he had been trained to see systems, efficiencies, waste. And Aurora Coffee, despite being a loving and well-intentioned business, was inefficient in ways that were costing real money. Roberto, he said one morning, cautiously approaching his boss, Could I suggest some improvements to the inventory control system? I have some experience in process optimization. Roberto, who was struggling with messy spreadsheets and trying to figure out why he always ran out of popular ingredients right during rush hour, said David could try anything. In 2 weeks, David had implemented a simple but effective digital system that tracked ingredient usage, predicted demand based on historical patterns, and automated orders to suppliers. The result was immediate. Waste fell by 30%, they never ran out of essential ingredients again, and the overall efficiency of the operation improved dramatically. Roberto was impressed but not surprised. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I used to optimize production lines in factories," David explained, and for the first time in months, there was pride in his voice. "It's the same basic logic, just applied to coffee and sandwiches instead of industrial products." Roberto wasn't a foolish man. He recognized talent when he saw it, and knew David was being wasted doing just cleaning and inventory organization. Besides, the improvements David had implemented were saving enough money to justify a better salary. "David," Roberto said one morning, calling him for a serious conversation, "I want to offer you the position of operations manager. It's not the engineering salary you used to make, but it's dignified, respectable, and comes with health benefits." David looked at Roberto as if he had just offered him the moon. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice full of barely contained emotion. "I'm sure," Roberto replied. "You saved my business from waste I didn't even know existed. More importantly, you proved you deserve trust and respect." Isabella watched this entire transformation happen with tears of joy in her eyes. The broken, hopeless man she had met 2 years ago had become confident, respected, and full of life again. More than that, he had found a way to use his engineering skills in a completely different context, proving that experience and intelligence never really become obsolete. "You saved my life," David told her one morning, 6 months after that first free coffee that changed everything. "No," Isabella replied, smiling through tears of pride. "You saved your own life. I just offered coffee and believed in you when you had forgotten how to believe in yourself." David laughed, a rich and genuine sound that Isabella had learned to love. "The best coffee I ever had in my life." 2 years passed. Isabella finally managed to save enough money to return to nursing school, working at Aurora Coffee on weekends while studying during the week. David had not only established himself in his new position, but had also transformed the coffee shop into one of the most efficient and profitable businesses in the neighborhood. On Isabella's graduation day, David was there in the audience, applauding with paternal pride, alongside Roberto and the entire Aurora Coffee family they had created together. "Will you still work here on weekends?" David asked after the ceremony, as they walked through Portland streets that no longer seemed so cold and impersonal. "Always," Isabella replied without hesitation. "This coffee shop taught me that sometimes the biggest difference we can make in someone's life starts with a simple act of kindness. And besides, you all are my family." David smiled, that genuine and warm smile that had completely replaced the empty look from 2 years ago. He walked to Aurora Coffee's counter and picked up 2 perfectly prepared coffees. "Then here's a free coffee for you," he said, extending the steaming cup to Isabella. "Because everyone deserves a little kindness. Especially on special days like this." Isabella accepted the coffee and they both laughed, knowing they had found not only lasting friendship but also living proof that human compassion can literally save lives and transform destinies in ways we never imagined possible. The seed of kindness that Isabella's grandmother always talked about had, indeed, bloomed more beautifully than anyone could have predicted. And it all started with a simple free coffee on a rainy November morning.